So, the NBA free agency season is right around the corner, and of course, with it being that time of year, we had to talk about some of the trade rumors surrounding some of the more impactful players that could be on the move in the upcoming weeks. First player up is Rudy Gobert. Now, I think it's pretty undeniable that the Utah Jazz have hit a ceiling. For the past 6 years, a franchise that had been relatively successful in the regular season has failed to make a conference finals appearance, and this year the Jazz postseason success concluded in the first round by the hands of a Dallas Mavericks team that didn't have Luka Doncic for half of the series. And with this underwhelming playoff run, as well as Joe Ingles no longer being on the team, Mike Conley being 35 at the beginning of next season, and head coach Quinn Snyder stepping away from the organization, it seems like the change is inevitable. Now, of course, a lot of people want to talk about D. Mitch, and that largely has to do with the fact that he is a more visually appealing star. But the player that I think will be more impactful on a new roster is the 7-foot defensive Frenchman, Rudy Gobert. Undeniably, Rudy Gobert over the past handful of seasons has proven that he has been one of the most impressive defensive anchors in the NBA for the better part of the last 15 seasons. Now, not only do the numbers back this up, but more importantly, it's very impressive that Gobert has been able to ascend this team to elite level status defensively while having a mediocre supporting cast on that side of the floor. Because of that, if the Utah Jazz decided to opt out and blow the whole team up, which I think they will because they don't really have that much flexibility financially to add anything of significance to help this team out on the perimeter defensively, the organization that should be in pursuit of Gobert needs to be one who has the ability to aid him on that side of the floor instead of rely on him. The destination that gets brought up the most is Atlanta, an organization that struggled mightily this past season on the defensive end as they ranked in the bottom 5 on that side of the floor, and a huge reason for this is because of the lack of impact that Clint Capella had manning the paint. Having an upgrade from Capella to Gobert would be a necessary one, especially when you have a smaller guard like Trae Young who has defensive limitations, who has to stay on the floor consistently because how valuable he is on the other side of the floor. And speaking of Trae Young and on the offensive end, one of the biggest flaws in Rudy Gobert's game is offensively, he is inept. Now, some of that can be fixed if you put him around a proper playmaker who can set him up and give him easier buckets, because when he was able to finish around the rim, he did so at a league high average. Trae Young, unlike everyone on the Utah Jazz, does not struggle in that compartment, and actually having an elite level playmaker on the same floor with Gobert not only is a great compliment to his game, but will also allow us to see his true potential. And the other reason why so many people are pointing Rudy Gobert in the direction of Atlanta is because what the Jazz can get in return. Players like Onyeka and Collins are solid up-and-coming players who you can certainly feel out for what they could be on another roster, especially given more opportunity, and also having a $20 million expiring contract in Danilo Gallinari is something that Utah would also be looking for in the transaction if they're going to hit the restart button and getting off of that massive contract from Gobert. Other teams that I could see trading for Gobert are Charlotte, Chicago, and Toronto, but with all things considered, I believe Atlanta is the best option for both parties. Now, from one defensive piece to another, up next we have Dejounte Murray. Murray is a 25-year-old star guard who plays for the San Antonio Spurs, and it seems like San Antonio is willing to move forward without him, as more than likely giving the defensive-oriented guard a max contract will not fit within their timeline, as San Antonio is looking to rebuild. And because of this revelation, Dejounte landing on the right team could drastically change the landscape in the NBA, as he finished the season averaging 21 points, 9 assists, 8 rebounds, led the league in steals with 2 a game, and what's also very impressive is that someone with his age and lack of experience to pick up that much of a responsibility on the offensive end while still only turning the ball over 2.5 times per game. Now, this doesn't mean that he's a perfect guard. In particular, the lack of range that he displays with his scoring can certainly be a hindrance on any offense, but that's why I stated before, it's very important that he lands on the right team with the right structure and teammates surrounding him. As I record this video, there are several rumors that the Hawks might be interested, which makes a lot of sense for the exact same reason that they would be interested in Rudy Gobert. But what makes things a bit more interesting for Dejounte Murray is the added depth in the offensive scheme that he could provide for Atlanta. Defensive-oriented teams like the Bucks, Heat, and Celtics have the personnel to contain Trae Young and really slow down the Hawks' offense to the point where they really won't be that impactful. So adding another ball handler to the roster can certainly add a level of versatility that the offense desperately needs. Furthermore, with a level of three-point shooting that will be surrounding Murray in Atlanta, I really don't see his limitations being that much of a hindrance on this offense, maybe outside of a few lineups and situations where he and Clint Capella could potentially share the floor. But outside of that, a little bit of drop off on the offensive end to potentially see some increase in production on the defensive side of the floor is certainly a trade-off that I would be willing to make if I am Atlanta. And for the San Antonio Spurs, just like the Utah Jazz, Atlanta is a really good trading mate because they have young players, draft picks, and expiring contracts that they could throw their way. Other teams that should be involved are the Washington Wizards and Denver Nuggets, especially if Washington has the ability to retain Bradley Beal. The Wizards are an organization that desperately needs some guard play and decision making in the backcourt alongside Beal to make his job easier, so having Murray out there in DC will be a much needed upgrade. But nevertheless, be on the lookout for Dejounte Murray. I know a lot of people don't talk about him, however, if he lands on the right team, it could be game changing for specific organizations and other title contending teams, because I do believe he is that good of a player. Up next, we have DeAndre Ayton, and I'm slightly split on how I feel about the big fella. Standing roughly 7 feet tall while having the ability to score 16 to 18 points per game, while also grabbing 10 boards, 3 of which on the offensive end, and being a respectable free throw shooter is normally enough for any team in the NBA to keep someone like that on their roster, especially when they're only 24 years old. However, it seems like Phoenix might be moving in a different direction if DeAndre Ayton has the ability to go into free agency and receives a max contract from another suitor. And quite honestly, I can understand why Phoenix feels this way. Ayton has not yet proven that he is a max contract player. His motor is inconsistent, he's not a quality defender, and there certainly seems to be some limitations on the offensive end in terms of his ability to just create his own shot consistently. Now, to be fair to Ayton, one could easily argue that his role has not been consistent over the past 2 to 3 years with the addition of Chris Paul, and because of that, it may have put a cap on his potential impact that he could have on a team if given the proper opportunity, and that's where things get a little shaky. There's several times where I've seen Ayton have the ability to create his own shot. He certainly shows glimpses of being a quality defender, and with him already having some postseason reps under his belt at such a young age, there definitely is a possibility that the player that we've seen over the past 2.5 seasons is just a suppressed version of the young prospect. And because of that, many people, including myself, believes that even though he may not be worth a max contract for the Phoenix Suns, he might be worth max to another organization. 2 teams that immediately come to my mind are the Portland Trailblazers and the Charlotte Hornets. Portland is an organization that has been scrambling over the past couple of years to make some severe changes and alterations to their roster. In this past season, they did so by offloading CJ McCollum, as well as a few other supplementary pieces to give them the opportunity to swing big in the upcoming free agency market, and I certainly believe that DeAndre Ayton should be on their radar. Not only can someone easily argue that Ayton would be a better version of Nurkic with a higher defensive ceiling, but also if everything goes sour and Damian Lillard finally decides to demand a trade, hitting the restart button on your franchise with Ayton and Simons being the forefront of that rebuild certainly puts you in a better predicament than a lot of other franchises in the NBA. Then out east, you have the Charlotte Hornets, an organization that also desperately needs some front court presence, because all last year, the only legitimate big man that they had on their roster was Mason Plumlee. And then after that, they more than likely just played small. Now, of course, Charlotte is going to have to unload some contracts to bring on DeAndre Ayton. And if they do so, there is a possibility that Miles Bridges could just walk and go to another team in free agency, as Ayton would more than likely fulfill the role that Bridges did offensively, while also having a higher upside. And on top of that, giving LaMelo Ball a legitimate rim pressure threat coming off of a pick and roll can certainly open up his game a bit more as well. Now, with that being said, I think a question that's just as important on where exactly should Ayton go will be, what exactly is Phoenix going to do to fill in that 5 spot? Because even though, yes, this is a team that just a year ago was able to make it to the NBA Finals, part of the reason why they lost is because they lacked size. They addressed this concern by picking up JaVale McGee in the offseason, but I don't believe a player like McGee is good enough to just be in a starting lineup. And actually, when you go in the free agency market, there just aren't that many options. The Suns find themselves in this situation because they were willing to throw so much money at other players on the roster, which inevitably was going to bite them on the backside. And now, faced with the reality that Ayton could potentially play for another organization, it does force many people to question the decision-making out in Phoenix. Is it really worth leveraging your future with Ayton to try to take advantage of the window of opportunity that you have right now, especially when many people, including myself, believe that that window is already closed? Now for the next couple of names, I'm going to just rattle off quickly because I don't necessarily know how impactful they're going to be on a new team, nor am I even 100% sure some of these players will be moved. For starters, we have Gordon Hayward. Charlotte's trying to move off of the 32-year-old forward because even though, yes, he is impactful when he is available, the problem is that he's rarely available. Add on top of the fact that Hayward being on the team gives them less financial flexibility, so moving off of Hayward for an expiring contract is the most ideal situation. The problem is the Hornets are going to have to find an organization that is desperate enough to take on Gordon Hayward and the risk that is paying him $30+ million, and he may not even be available for all of the games. Luckily for Charlotte, the Lakers may fit the bill as LA is desperately trying to move on from Westbrook, and with Westbrook on an expiring contract, even though he's getting paid more than Hayward this season, once the year is over, you now have more cap flexibility moving forward to make more alterations to a young core that's trying to move in a different direction. Now, if that does happen and Westbrook gets bought out, it will be very interesting to see what the market looks like for Westbrook after the piss poor season he just had. Another player that could be on the move is Malcolm Brogdon. Similar to Hayward, Brogdon, when he's on the floor, he definitely can provide some quality minutes, but the problem is that he's very rarely on the floor. And with him still under contract for 3 more seasons at $22+ million each year, the Indiana Pacers are certainly looking to move in a different direction after they acquired Tyrese Halliburton at the trade deadline in the middle of the season. But again, once more, the Pacers have to find a team desperate enough to take on Malcolm Brogdon's contract with the risk of him just missing a good portion of the season. Once more, the Lakers might be the best suitors or possibly participating in a 3-team trade just to throw in Malcolm Brogdon to get the deal done and in return receiving some younger players or draft compensation. Next up, we have Duncan Robinson with the Miami Heat. Last year, Duncan was so miserable that he was practically unplayable during the postseason, which is certainly a hard pill to swallow with him being in year 1 of a 5-year, $90 million contract. Luckily, his contract is still manageable, and at 27 years old, there might be some suitors out there for him. However, because of the bad postseason run and because of the glaring limitations, I don't know how easy it will be for Miami to find a suitor for his services, especially with him having 4 more years under his contract. More than likely, what you see out of Duncan Robinson today is what you're going to get out of him for the foreseeable future, and that's both the good and bad. And then finally, we have the 2 names that we constantly throw in conversations to be traded, and those names are Bradley Beal and Damian Lillard. Portland is clearly trying to restructure their roster around Dame. Picking up Jeremy Grant was a great move for them, and I do believe they still have a lot of pieces that they can move if need be. Unfortunately though, this free agency class is a miserable one, which is why I believe that there's a real possibility that they could go through the entire offseason, swing and miss on practically every player that they could potentially sign or trade for, and head into this upcoming season with a mediocre roster. And if that does happen, who knows, maybe Dame will finally demand a trade that he rightfully deserves. But until then, I just got to see what's going to happen. And then when it comes to Bradley Beal, I honestly don't understand what's going on. He is eligible for a max contract extension, and because it's coming from the Wizards, they can pay him the most money out of anyone else in the league. However, I would have to ask, if you're the Wizards, why are you doing this? Bradley Beal is a really great player, but he's not so great that he's going to transcend the lackluster roster surrounding him and constantly lead this team into the postseason. And even if he does, I mean, we're talking about a team that is a first-round exit. Is it really worth handing him a boatload of money just so you can call yourself a play-in contender? Because that's more or less what Washington will be. And then, oh yeah, just briefly, when it comes to Donovan Mitchell, even if they trade Rudy Gobert, I think Utah is going to keep D. Mitch and just try to restructure the roster around him since he's a younger player. So personally, I don't think that he's going to be made available in the open market. And even if he is, I just don't see that many teams falling over themselves to give up a quality package in return from D. Mitch. And with that being said, please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Also, if you want to know my thoughts on the whole Brooklyn Nets and Kyrie Irving debacle, because I didn't put it in this video with him opting in his last year of his contract. However, I did talk about it on my second channel, so go check that out. If not, just hit the subscribe button. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.